All right, people, we're back with the next installment of the Fast and Furious. Oh, wait, whoops, wrong franchise. I just realized I was getting my logos confused there. No, instead, we have returned to the Wasteland for the next installment in. Wait, Mac, it's been 9 years since Fury Road? What the fuck is going on here? People, we are back for the 5th installment in the Mad Max saga, which I don't think is anything that you and I saw coming. Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, a prequel about about Charlize Theron's character from Fury Road, Furiosa, this time portrayed by Anya Tayor-Joy. Mac, this should have been an absolute recipe for disaster, and somehow only in 2024 did this come out being one of the best movies of the year so far. If I do say so myself, if I'm just pulling that Band-Aid right off.
Yeah, it's weird because it's like, first of all, I was my freshman year when Mad Max Fury Road came out. I was 15 when that movie came out. Now being 24 years old and this being the first Mad Max movie I saw in theaters, it was like an experience because my biggest regret is never seeing Fury Road in theater. And, you know, I wasn't that hooked on it. I like Furiosa's character. Charlize Theron did a good job in that movie. I was a little iffy on them doing a prequel movie. I'm like, is this going to fall into the traps of the modern audience? But, you know, I think with the right casting, the fact George Miller's back, and like, if you think about it, the only bad Mad Max film is probably Thunderdome. And even with Thunderdome, it's not like horrendous. I think Furiosa does a good job of keeping the spirit of Mad Max alive and kind of showing that we don't need Max, but it's such a fun movie. It's a damn good movie.
Absolutely. Oh, we're going to talk about all of that and more on today's episode of the Talkin' TV podcast with Dom and Mac. Stay tuned. Mac, my guy. Oh, man. Like, we just had so much fun doing that quick spur of the moment, last minute MCU tier ranking. And so naturally it fits, obviously, that we're together to talk about Furiosa, a Mad Max saga. I took a little bit of a break off last week. I was set to review Imaginary Friends and Back to Black, but due to everything that was going on in my life, I just graduated from school. I was going through a little bit of, those post-graduation blues right there. I'm in the midst of, just to give you guys some behind the scenes as far as what's going on at the Talkin' TV podcast. We haven't done that in a while. I'm in the little bit of a midst of a creative reset in terms of figuring out exactly what I want for the podcast going forward. Maybe not necessarily going live every week the way that I was doing so previously, keeping more so in tune, letting the year actually dictate what it is that is going on with the podcast rather than trying to mold the podcast around the year of movies, trying to put out an episode every week. I tried to do that back in 2022. It didn't work out so well. 2023, obviously, it benefited me tremendously. And then this year, given the inherent overall quality of movies, it hasn't been too great. We've had some fun episodes, Godzilla and Kong, Dune 2, our Marvel updates episode where you guys review bomb Madam Web for me. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes was pretty solid. But now here we are. And the weird thing about Furiosa is that even in the year of 2024, kind of, the year where, again, it's another 2008, 2009, in that this is a year that is just riddled. The strike effect can be seen across the board. We have precious little content. What little content we have is pretty middling to average at best. The TV has just not been there. But what's interesting is that kind of they've taken the lesson, what the studios have done is they've taken the lesson of the last couple of years, which is where we're just going to make like 1 to 2 like movies a year, and we're just going to make them the biggest friggin' events of the year. And they really seem to have been running with that this year, even with movies from like smaller budgeted studios, like what A24 was able to pull off with Civil War was actually kind of impressive. April's usually a month that doesn't have a lot of box office successes, and what they were able to pull off with Civil War, and then and kind of the effect that movie had across the board was kind of rather interesting, even if the movie itself didn't measure up to snuff. And now we're into May, the beginning of the summer, and it's been one of the strangest Mays yet. We don't have a Marvel movie that opened up the month. We had The Fall Guy, which went to direct to DVD only 2 weeks.
It was quick. Yeah, it was a quick turnaround.
Yeah, 2 weeks after it was in theaters. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes was a pretty big success, and now we're here We're at Memorial Day. Memorial Day is always an interesting time of the year. You know, this is infamously the spot where Top Gun opened up 2 years ago and saved cinema, quote unquote, and was like the highest grossing movie and the biggest movie event in a long, long time. Memorial Day has always, again, kind of been a hit or miss ratio. I would have to do my homework as far as what's come out over the last couple of years in this spot, but I do remember distinctly that this was when I believe it was the 6th Fast and Furious movie opened in this spot back in 2013, about 10 years ago. I'm trying to remember 10 years ago when 2014, because Apes didn't open at this time. Guardians of the Galaxy didn't open. Winter Soldier had already been out. So I'm trying to remember what the Memorial Day release was for 2014. And then obviously there's the interesting thing being that, like, this is one of those franchises that has kind of a really interesting mythos behind it, which is also something that I feel like a lot of franchises have been missing or just trying to recapture. A lot of franchises have been just trying to capture like that, you know, that old school magic in terms of like getting people to come back and tune in for, you know, the nostalgia berries, the member berries, if you will. But what's so strange about Mad Max is that it's been a 9-year, I think probably the weirdest thing that happened with this movie going in was that it's been 9 years since the last one. And as soon as the movie started, it felt like no time had passed. It felt like no time had passed. Did you notice that?
Yeah, because that's the thing with what we got to mention. Fury Road was like one of the biggest hits of the 2015, and it was so good. It was nominated for Best Picture, like legit, like one of the shocking nominations I've ever seen. And I don't think it won. It didn't win, but I think it didn't win anything.
It didn't win picture, but it won damn near every technical.
Yeah, because that one thing I have to respect about George Miller is that he's just like FCGI, everything's practical, and that kept the same spirit in Fury Road. But no, it's weird because you think about it, when 2015 was happening, we're like, all right, cool, we're gonna get a sequel to this, Fall Max, another adventure. But Furiosa was such a popular character. I guess the next step would have been to do a sequel to that, but we waited all these years later. He's like, nah, we're gonna do a prequel. And it's like, wait, what? And it does feel weird because the timeline of the Mad Max films are a little weird unless you're really paying attention. So it's like a weird continuity because we're following Max, who goes from different adventure to adventure, meeting different people, and rarely do you have people from the previous film kind of go to the next film. And I mean, I liked what they did here or how they said it because it makes sense putting it here, because you think like, okay, if we're gonna meet Furiosa and Fury Road, what was she doing between the certain films? And I actually like how they established where this takes place and actually gave a little Easter egg of what was to come.
Well, we got about 3 different things, right, kind of going on here, right? We kind of have the story of George Miller's entire career, which is one of the most fascinating careers that I think of I've seen of any director in Hollywood. Especially considering the fact that the last movie that he directed before Fury Road was Happy Feet 2. More on that in a little bit. Then you have kind of the story of the Mad Max saga in general, right? Which does tie in with Miller, but also kind of has its own identity in and of itself. And then we kind of have the story of what is to come. So we got to break down those 3 things first. Number 1, George Miller, right? Australian director, kind of comes out, it kind of pulls a little bit of a Ridley Scott in that he kind of comes in late at the very, very end of the 70s, right? So he can't technically be considered a part of the film brats, that infamous group of directors that was the first generation of directors to come out of film school and took Hollywood by storm in the sense, your Coppolas, your George Lucas's, your Steven Spielberg's, your Martin Scorsese's, and your Brian De Palma's, along with several others that have kind of been, old school working class Hollywood directors, but kind of really made their stink in the 70s. Sidney Lumet is someone who comes to mind. But you got these guys like George Miller and Ridley Scott, who were not native to America, but kind of came out with these very cult-ish movies that did very, very well, very, very well in theaters. Alien and the first Mad Max series. And George Miller kind of does what really no director had been doing at the time, because even Coppola didn't want to come back to do Godfather 2, which is that he kind of has this cult movie that they made on a shoestring budget. Literally, there's stories behind the scenes of George Miller literally paying extras with beer because they didn't have money to pay extras, and people like rushing to the hospital because, extras were getting injured with the stunts every day, And also, if you look at that first Mad Max movie in comparison to the rest of the series.
Oh my God, that is...
Well, outside of the Mel Gibson of it all, it barely resembles the rest of the Mad Max movies, because every other one of the Mad Max movies occurs after kind of the apocalypse happens and takes place in the dystopia, versus that first one kind of takes place right on the cusp of it happening. And it's more so of a character study of this character, Max, and how he loses his family and how he becomes this, like, kind of a mindless vigilante before he becomes this aimless wanderer who kind of travels from location to location throughout each of the sequels. And so he kind of makes this not really succinct trilogy, but he kind of makes this, these three movies that kind of all revolve around this one character of Max, and then he goes away from it. He makes several interesting movies, Witches of Eastwick, Lorenzo's Oil, what's it called? There's one other one that's in there in the mid. Babe Pig in the City. Famously, he did not direct the first Babe, but he did that second one. Really would love to.
He was like, I gotta do this, the second one, because I watched the first one. It was peak cinema, so I like Babe Pig in the City. That's actually
it's funny because I feel like for anybody who, if you ever ask somebody, who's the director that they would most want to sit down and have a conversation with, pick their brain. Obviously, everybody knows that mine would be Quentin Tarantino. But honestly, after just looking at his filmography, George Miller really would be that one person, because I really would just want to know. I'm like, George, these movies, like specifically the animated movies and the kids movies, I'm like, that was all just for the money, right? And if I had to guess, he would probably tell you the same way, because I believe that when he was doing press for Fury Road, right? The whole thing was that he's like, that was kind of an idea that had been gestating in his mind for a while, because it kind of worked out time-wise perfectly, right? Fury Road comes out in 2015, and even 30 years after Beyond Thunderdome, which had been the last time that we visited this. And I mean, obviously, when the news breaks out, obviously, the internet and film Twitter weren't what they were now in 2014, 2015, when this is circulating around. But you hear the news and you're like, wait, they're making another Mad Max movie? Like, why? I mean, those were like kind of like cultish movies, but like, what? Really? You can do this again?
The funniest thing that I read about for Fury Road is that apparently when he was working on the Happy Feet movies, he was storyboarding Fury Road. So
hey, there you go. That proves my point.
I want to walk in that office just to see like a plush of the Happy Feet, and you got storyboards of Fury Road. It's like that office must have been like a mess. And like I wish that like the movies kind of merged together. So we watched Fury Road and Furiosa. They just did a penguin or something. But I think Happy Feet should be a prequel to Fury Road and how climate change got to
Listen, I was about to say, I mean, it's interesting because ironically, one of the first movies that I watched when I moved into my apartment down here was Happy Feet. And the thing that I forgot about is I'm like, man, I forgot that like how heavy the emphasis on climate change was with these movies. I was actually like pretty I was actually quite surprised by that, and with how mature and kind of forward thinking it was. Really what a solid like 5 to 6 years before like the climate change debate really started to like matriculate around the news pundits. But I digress. So you have that going on, right? And so the other thing too to keep in mind also, this is 2015, which is the year kind of that the soft reboot / remake happened, right? Because you remember, this is the year of Jurassic World. This is the year of Creed. This is the year of, we get Star Wars back with The Force Awakens. These movies that kind of are all, low-key, like, soft-core reboots of the original properties that they are seeking to continue while also continuing them for a new generation. And in 2015, before the era of where just they just started to ruin movies, I would say they probably did a pretty good job, because the weakest of those movies that I would say is Jurassic World. And even that one, I would say, is light years better than the movies that followed it, So...
yeah. I'd say so too, because it's like it was weird that year. We had you're actually, now I'm thinking about it, we did have it was the year of like the legacy sequel reboot prequel stuff. That was it was weird.
But Fury Road is kind of the one that kicks that all off. But then you see the trailers for that, and you're like, this doesn't look anything like the Mad Max movies of old, namely obviously because it's 2015 versus the 80s, but still like that. But and probably the biggest thing too is that it's shot practically. But I think what's also so interesting about Fury Road and what that accomplishes, what you were talking about at the top of this, which is it's a blockbuster, which at that point the Oscars were kind of starting to get away from. Avatar kind of had already taken over the world a couple of years before that, and we really hadn't had like a massively budgeted blockbuster of that level kind of come in and kind of take over the movie sphere like that. And it's interesting because when I saw that movie, I was a senior in high school. It was 1 week after Age of Ultron, which at that point I was only about the Avengers, because I'm like, oh my God, we finally got them back. The Marvel machine was still, just really starting to kick off. It was kind of, recapturing the fun that I had freshman year of high school when the first Avengers movie came out. And then this Mad Max Fury Road movie comes out, and I watch it and I'm like, okay, this has got some pretty dope action in it, but like, what does this movie really have going for it other than that? I'm like, okay, it's just a massive, almost 2-hour-long chase movie, and that's about it. I'm like, the acting is good and everything, and the scenery is cool, but it's kind of fascinating how these types of movies work, because despite this movie, Fury Road, kind of having that very simplistic plot, And in a weird way, kind of, I had a similar problem with it that I did with Dunkirk 2 years later. But it's that it's the rewatchability and the simplicity of it that really allows these things to last over time. And now here we are 9 years later, especially with Furiosa as this companion piece. And Fury Road has kind of gone on to be like, to develop this reputation where I'm like, oh, like, first of all, obviously with the direction that movies have gone since that came out, I'm like, it's yet again another situation where I'm like, man, I did not realize how good we had it. You know, we did not realize how good we were eating in 2015, 2016 specifically, you know, where that movie and just what it is able to pull off on a technical level is so insane when you consider how, 80 to 90% of that movie is practically shot, you know? And it's kind of insane how when I'm watching this movie, Furiosa, again, it's been 9 years since that last movie, and it feels like no time has passed. No time has passed at all. I remember all of the mythos, all the characters and such, you know, the freaking, you know, the gas farm, bullet farm, Citadel relation, you know, the land of green, all that, where Furiosa originates from. And I'm remembering this, and I'm immediately like, how is it that all of this mythology and lore is so much clearer to me than any of the other franchises that I've watched in the last in the last decade? You know, I'm just wondering, like, did you have that similar reaction when you were watching this?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that again? I was just reading about the no, it's just like the budget, just to compare it. The budget from the first Mad Max film ranged between 350,000 to 400,000, and now Furiosa is 168 million. So I think that answers the question of how they have that much money on. But what did you say the first time?
Just in the sense of like how, even though there's such a large gap between movies, like perfect example, right? Perfect example. Avatar: The Way of Water, right?
Oh god,
that movie comes out, and you're like, okay, they're trying to catch us up on all this lore and mythos that ultimately, like, we really don't care about, right? And also that movie kind of shoots itself in the foot where it kind of has to have like a 20-minute long prologue of catching you up with everything because it's been so long, and so by nature they have to make the gap that's happened in universe in between those movies so long in order to catch you up. And then they just end up jumping before they can actually get the movie going. Versus with this movie, you know, I was a little bit worried with the opening scene, right? Because it's kind of the same opening scene as Fury Road. But then once you get started and it immediately launches you back into the world, and without feeling like it has to catch you up and like, you know, oh, here's all the exposition, here's what you missed last time. It kind of just does what almost no movie does now, which is it just jumps into the story and lets you follow along. And first of all, I cannot tell you how much I appreciated that, because again, that is something that just no movie does anymore. So automatic props to George Miller for just respecting his own lore in general. And secondly, just the fact that, you know, kind of how it works, companion piece wise. Like, I guess what I'm trying to get at is like how, like, you felt like no time had passed, right?
No,
because
I think with like the way that they set this up is a good way, because obviously, like you mentioned before, the Mad Max series has a very cult-like following. Like, if you've seen all of them, you love all of them, you're gonna watch it, and you're gonna play the video games, you're gonna read the comics. I played the video game, and actually there's a connection to the 2015 video game, and I'm pretty sure all of 15 people like myself played. And I think with that opening scene, I was scared, like you mentioned, that it was gonna be like, uh-oh, this is gonna be for real. But no, it does a good job of kind of like letting you connect the dots. Like, George Miller realizes he's not treating his audience like dumb. He's not going to hold your hand throughout this film and say, hey, here's how this connects. He's going to let you get it. Like, he's going to and it does a good job of actually building the world and getting more plot points. And there are some things where you're like, oh, that's how that connects to this, and it connects to the other film. So I think it does make it good to connecting, and it really does feel like no time has passed. Because even though the last film was almost 10 years ago, this feels like this picks up like a year later. Like, this came out a year later.
Literally. And like, with the exception of there being significantly more CGI usage in this movie than there was in Fury Road. That being said, again, just the fact that he's able to pull that off on a technical level, making you feel like no time has passed. You know, the fact that, again, all of those actors that appeared in Fury Road, it's been 9 years since we've seen those guys, and to the point where, again, the actor who played what's it called, Immortan Joe,
he passed away.
He's passed away, so we have a completely different actor playing him. And other than the voice, you really don't even notice it. But even still, I would even go one step further, that is, say, as much as So this movie did one of two things, which is, again, is part of the reason why I love it so much. It's not only did it make Fury Road kind of a little bit better in hindsight, but I think it is a better movie than Fury Road in the sense of where Fury Road being this kind of 2-hour-long chase movie, right? This movie, I think, does it really, again, it is a character journey and a study, you know? And like, there are elements of hero's journey and kind of survivalist stories that we've seen so many times before in other movies, but immediately this one actually feels like it's about a character versus the Fury Road, which kind of feels like, you know, the lead character, which is Max, who at the end of the day is not the lead character of that movie, kind of just getting swept along for the journey, you know? And obviously there's behind the scenes stories that happen there, you know, obviously kind of everything that happened with Tom Hardy. Personally, in the irony being that in hindsight, Tom Hardy is kind of the worst part about Fury Road. But
okay, let's not go that far.
Listen, I'm sorry, but when 90% of his lines, what few lines he has in the movie, are dubbed over, that should tell you something. Plus, I have some behind the scenes insider baseball on Tom Hardy that may, you know, unfortunately, you know, quell some of the hype around him. But kind of where I have to give credit to George Miller, not only for kind of how he's managed to bring his own universe back and in a way more relevant and more awesome than it ever had been before. It's that he realizes that this world, this mythos, doesn't necessarily have to revolve around one character. And I kind of love that when creators are able to do that, because they're able to do that so rarely, you know? So rarely are you able to make an entire world more interesting than the one character that you've introduced it to. Like, as far as I'm concerned, like, you don't even need to do another movie about Furiosa. You could just continue to make movies that are set in the Wasteland that are about all of these different characters and civilizations, you know?
That's what I was gonna say too. With the whole series, it's just like one of the bigger things that I think makes Mad Max kind of like respectable for its lore is that the entire world itself is a character, because the little thing we know about is that there was wars, there's water shortage, and it's just a desert wasteland. And we know it's Australia. And I like to make a joke that this is just a regular Tuesday in Australia. But that's the thing with it. It's like you really don't need Max. Like Max, it is Mad Max, and you know he is kind of like the de facto main guy because we followed him. But I'll give an example. When George Miller had the idea for Fury Road back in 1987, and at that time we had Thunderdome with Tina Turner, and you know, and then it was a development hell for so long, and then the whole Mel Gibson thing happened, and they had to fire him. And I remember everyone was like, "Oh, Mel Gibson's not going to be Mad Max. I'm not going to see this." Blah, 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 blah. Then Tom Hardy was on Mad Max, right? Okay, that's fine. And then they were like, "We're going to do Furiosa, which is going to be the same universe." They were like, "Eh." And then now Furiosa's doing well, and it's like, okay, maybe we don't need Max. You can make a story of, like, honestly, I would love a TV series about the lead up, having it go to that world, because in the first Mad Max film, we kind of saw the start of it, but we didn't get a full backstory. Like, I would like them to dive into like what made this world what it is, and like kind of the lead up to it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Like, this is a rich and interesting world, and it's so funny because, you know, the biggest difference between something like this and Dune is where Dune is based off of books. So you kind of have all of that mythos, you know, out there already to know. And so Dune, it's more so about, okay, how are they gonna nail the presentation of this? You know, it's kind of the issue also that they have every time you have a comic, you know, an adaptation of a comic book. You're always going to be comparing it to the original source material. Versus Mad Max is kind of, if you think about it, really the only other like major franchise like Star Wars where it originated on screen, it originated as movies, that it feels like people are like, they're really still interested in and still like, you know, really doing their homework. And as far as like, you know, all of the lore is kind of there and you're like really interested in following it, because really every other franchise that kind of originated in film, they kind of screwed up, you know, and there aren't many, you know. It's like, I can think of like a few: Alien, Predator, Terminator, all of these other, you know, kind of lore that originated on screen. They've screwed every single one of those up. Even Star Wars, they screwed up, you know?
Yeah.
So kind of the fact that this is kind of in a way the last purely cinematic franchise that we have, and the fact that also this is the only one of those cinematic franchises that that is directed by the same person. I mean, obviously you have the Planet of the Apes movies, but those originated in the 60s, so by nature they're not going to have, you know, the same level, you know, the same person directing all of them. This has been the same person directing all 5 of these movies now. How many other franchises can you say that about, you know? And the fact that he's 71, 72, and he's still just as invested and seems to have just as much passion and energy as he did when he was making them in the 70s and 80s, that's impressive to say the least.
Yeah, it is kind of like it's his baby, and I don't see him ever giving this up because like even like like we mentioned, he's working on Happy Feet. He was still working on Fury Road and everything like that. He's been working on Mad Max since 1979, and to think that if he's in his 70s now, and that was 79, so about 40, he was probably in his 30s when he started doing this. And he's a well-respected director. Like everyone wants to work with him. Like that's how he's able to get in big names like Chris Hemsworth. He's a big A-list actor too. You get him in there. Anya Tayor-Joy, which let me mention first with the casting in this movie. If you're Mad Max Fury Road, I think Anya Tayor-Joy was the best choice to play Furiosa. Because I think she is one of the more underrated actresses in this generation. She's able to give a performance, because I remember I first watched her in Split and I was like, okay, you got something going. And then like the past couple of years we've seen her, I still love her in The Menu. I love The Witch, and I think her performance, like having her be in this world, and kind of I see her as a young Charlize Theron as Furiosa. Like she works perfectly for this. And I liked Chris Hemsworth's performance. He was pretty cool as a villain. Like he was just having fun, and I'm like, I have not seen him have fun since Thor Ragnarok, probably.
So I'm glad that you brought up Anya specifically, because again, we are gonna talk about the cast, honestly. So Discussing Film on Twitter released a poll from THR about the top 10 new A-list movie stars of Hollywood. And as of right now, well, first of all, the fact that Anya Tayor-Joy only ranked 8th on there is ridiculous to me, because of that entire list, which also includes the likes of Zendaya, Glenn Powell, Jake Elordi, Paul Mescal, Austin Butler, Jenna Ortega, Florence Pugh, Sydney Sweeney, and Timothée Chalamet. Anya's my absolute favorite of those. Anya is somebody who, again, I've been noticing her, really following her for close to 10 years now. I kind of am a little bit of an Anya purist in the sense of where I saw her when she first started. I saw The Witch and Split both when they were first released within those movies were within a year of each other, not even. And I was just absolutely floored to be like, who is that girl? And then it just kept going and kept going and kept going. And she's one of those only stars on that list that I just read off who consistently has never let me down as far as movies go. I would make the argument she is the best actor of the Gen Z class of actors that has come out, in the sense that she has never given a bad performance and has never disappointed me, even though unfortunately she has been stuck in, a few stinkers. She did unfortunately, contractually obligated to appear in Glass, and we all know how that went. But again, I mean, you look at the track record that she's had since then, movies like Thoroughbreds, The Northman, what's it called? The Menu, last year. Last night in Soho. Exactly. Like the track record, it just keeps going and going and going. And hell, even a movie like Morgan, which, do you remember that movie when that came out? The movie that Ridley Scott's son directed my God. And which is another movie where, again, had a bunch of people in it that you would know. Like, I remember it's like Toby Jones. I think Boyd Holbrook is in that movie. Chris Sullivan from This Is Us. Kate Mara's the lead in that movie. A couple other people that I'm forgetting off the top of my head. And Anya's in that. I think that's the first movie that I remember seeing her in, and she's fantastic in that, honestly. And even that movie, it's like, wow, the amount of fight choreography that she had to do. I would say probably her big breakthrough was Queen's Gambit, but honestly, between this and then she's got another between this and then I think she's supposed to be another pretty big blockbuster that's coming out later this year, currently of which is escaping me, but she has gotten quite the career recently, as far as stars under 30, and I am actually very, very excited to see I remember there's a reason why, because she was also in the other big desert movie this year. She was in Dune 2. She's going to be playing Alita, Paul's sister, in Dune Messiah when he eventually comes out. Obviously they made, in my opinion, the very smart decision of only having her be in a dream flashback of Paul's, and not having her, play this weird, 2-year-old with the brain of with the memories of over 10,000 years. So thankfully they didn't do that. But I'm a huge fan of Anya. I've said multiple times before that she is one of my biggest celebrity crushes, and I'm very, very excited to see what she does next and with her career. And as far as her being the choice to replace a young Charlize, again, it's one of those instances where I'm realizing now that the only kind of prequel castings that I enjoy are ones that I don't see coming. And this is one that, again, I had relatively little to no expectations for. I wasn't really paying attention to it. I'm like, okay, they're doing a prequel to Fury Road. Okay, whatever. Anya's playing the young Charlize. Okay, whatever. She'll probably be good, but I don't care enough, at the time. And then naturally when I see it, I'm like, oh, she's fucking awesome. She nails this. And this is You know, the cool thing about Anya is that she's got such a range as an actress. You know, she goes from, you know, she's played twisted, she's played really vulnerable, she's played, very sarcastic, she's played the smartest character in the room a couple times. She really runs the full gamut as far as acting abilities go, and that's the reason why she's my favorite one on that list so far that I just read off, because every one of those other actresses is kind of known for their one respective shtick, but she's the only one on that list to me that really has proven to be a true three-dimensional, fully fleshed out actor who can pull off all gamuts of emotion. And this is the first time that we get to see her just play a badass, just an absolute fucking badass. Where, again, and the irony being that you don't even spend the first hour of the movie with her. They pull
it builds up to it like builds up to her.
Yeah,
you get a glimpse, and then we got to wait.
They pull a Lion King in the sense of where the first 45 minutes of this movie you're spending with this younger actress who plays the younger version of her, who is also quite good, as she is kidnapped from her homeland, the Wasteland, and eventually brought to Chris Hemsworth's character Dementus, and then spend significant time with him before she's traded to Immortan Joe, and only then, obviously, and she's able to escape and kind of, blend in with the mechanics in his crew. That's when it transitions to Anya, and also the fact that she's got how many speaking lines of dialogue in this movie? Not even.
I think I count. Someone did count. I think she has like 54 lines of dialogue.
Yeah, which in a 2.5 hour long movie.
I think that's even less or the same as Tom Hardy as Mad Max and Fury Road.
I'm pretty sure. I think Tom Hardy still has less, because I don't know how much grunting counts as actually, lines. But yeah, it absolutely blew me away. It blew me away. And the fact of, also it's like, she does not have it easy, obviously, going into this. This is a character who, again, shaves her head multiple times, has to blend in, with guys, gets her arm crushed. That's the infamous thing. Furiosa, she's missing the one arm. So you're like, okay, at what point is she going to miss the arm? Is she going to get the arm chopped off? And the movie keeps going and going and going and going. And then we get to the assault on the bullet farm. And then you have Demetrius chasing them. And then the arm gets crushed and you just visibly cringe. You're like, oh!
Yeah, oh my. There's moments in films where I don't get squeamish a lot. That's why I can watch like Saw and eat a full meal. But, that scene with the arm get crushed and like the scene in Quiet Place when Emily Blunt steps on the nail. Those are like two of the scenes that I'm like, okay, I gotta turn away because this is, ugh.
I'll tell you why those work in the way that like other horror movie kills don't, because it's a matter of stakes, it's a matter of genre, and it's a matter of physics, right? The fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, we are so beyond used. If we're talking about horror specifically, we are so beyond used to watching umpteenth amount of bodies hit the ground in all sorts of disgusting ways that we've kind of become desensitized to it, right? As far as within the horror genre. But within the action genre, remember, this is a genre where, for the most part, because of by nature, they have always had to be palatable for a mainstream audience, versus horror, at least until recently, has always been more of a niche genre. They have always had to, even though you see all sorts of crazy stunts happening, and by nature, by virtue of the fact that, majority of them also are PG-13 rated, they don't actually get to show the actual level of impact and actual, actual stakes that can happen in these death-defying scenarios, ultimately, But these movies, which also are rated R and also are made by somebody who does not go by the typical Hollywood rules and restrictions. And one of the other reasons why I respect George Miller, it's like, yeah, if someone, these are dangerous freaking scenarios. If someone's racing in those level of vehicles at however many miles an hour without any of the current safety precautions and restrictions in the freaking desert, some limbs are gonna get ripped off and crushed between vehicles, and it's gonna be painful, and he's gonna make sure that you feel it when that happens. And it's so well done, honestly. And again, it's one of those instances where, again, why I give credit to this over Fury Road is because the balance between character journey and action in this movie is so well done, because again, it's a revenge story ultimately. It's a genre piece. It is ultimately it is a revenge story, a character getting ripped away from their home and then ultimately kind of being thrown along from place to place until they finally come to an age, to a point, but never losing track of that eye of the tiger, that one side of where, okay, I'm gonna get this motherfucker who took everything from me, that's in the form of Chris Hemsworth's character.
Yeah, that's the thing too. Like you mentioned with Fury Road being a chase movie, like I think George Miller took that and said, "Okay, the probably reason why we're looking at Furiosa a little bit more as like a complete film is because it actually has an overarching story, and it's not just the chase movie. Like in Fury Road, there was like an overarching story where she was trying to get them to the garden with her where she was from, and they actually talk about that in this film, so it connects with it. But I think with Furiosa is that it's more of a story. And it's not like there's chase elements, but it's more of a story where we can go from, okay, so this is what we're going to have to set up here. So this is going to be the rising action. This is the climax. And this is going to be a falling action. And like, it's more of a cohesive narrative.
Right, exactly. It's got a cohesive narrative. But even more than that, right? I think it's ironic that I mentioned that Fury Road feels like the third act of a movie. Because, and at the risk of spoiling things, right? The way that this movie cuts off, ultimately, and where it ends with, and you know what I'm going to talk about, I'm realizing now, I'm like, George Miller, you absolute mad genius. This is why I have so much respect for you as a filmmaker. This movie is the first two acts of the Fury Road story.
Yes, it is.
Where the way that this movie cuts off and leads into Fury Road, you realize the reason why Max doesn't feel like the main character of that movie is because he's not. He is ultimately just a passenger that gets sucked in the last act of Furiosa's story, where, and it's so brilliant how he's able to conceive of this, where Fury Road is the continuation of Furiosa. And if you watch these movies back to back in kind of this one successive arc, that's the complete package. That's the complete story. And the fact that he was able to kind of pull that off seamlessly over the course of a decade with only 2 movies, I mean, do you know any other director that's done that? I don't.
No, I can't put any names to it.
Yeah, it's fucking brilliant, honestly. It's absolutely fucking brilliant. And, you know, obviously her getting revenge and finally killing Hemsworth at the end, that's already just a satisfying enough conclusion in of its own. I'm like, all right, we can cut off here. You know, the movie's already long enough. That's it. Game over, you know? And the way that it's kind of been split up into chapters as well, very Zack Snyder-esque, if I do say so myself. But then it keeps going, and I'm like, okay, so obviously we know what happens here. Why do we keep going? You know, it's the return to the Citadel and everything, and then you see her walk into Immortan Joe's cavern, and you see the rest of his wives. But I'm like, wait, those are the wives from Fury Road. I'm like, I didn't see them. How much time has passed here? And then it cuts to, and now it's no longer Anya, it's Charlize as she's sneaking them into the trailer, into the truck, and then the door closes. Movie ends, and then this dude has the balls to just have Fury Road playing throughout the credits. I'm like, wow, chef's kiss. I was applauding. I'm like, that is somebody who knows what he is fucking doing. I was ecstatic about that. So happy because, again, it's so rare that a filmmaker is able to pull that off and have it not feel forced and not have everybody complaining and shit like that. But man, oh man, it made me immediately. I literally turned to the guy who I was seeing it with. I'm like, I just want to go home and watch Fury Road again so badly.
That's the thing.
So badly.
That's the awesome thing too, because people were asking me, like, do I have to watch Fury Road? So I'm like, actually, technically, no. I mean, if you want to learn more, if you've seen at least one Mad Max film that's not Fury Road, or you saw Fury Road, you don't have to watch it. I'd say you watch this first, then you can go back and watch like Fury Road or something.
Yeah, honestly, it's funny because I talked incessantly about how I edited Dune Parts 1 and 2 together into one 5-hour long master cut. And now I'm kind of tempted to do the same, create the Furiosa Mad Max cut. I don't even know what I would call it. Furiosa, Mad Max, Fury Road. Like, I don't even know what I would call it. But I think there's a universe in which you could put these 2 movies together and have it be one seamless. What would it be? Again, like 2 hours, 2.5. Have it be like one 4.5-hour long cut. You know?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, and I mean, if you want to talk about cuts, just real quick, did you see what they said about the Strangers movies, the new trilogy they're doing?
No, I did not.
They said that, so you know how we have part 1 is like bombing and part 2 is coming out later this year, and then part 3 is like, they said they want to put it all together because it's a 3-chapter movie.
Yeah.
I'm like, please God, no, don't do that. But honestly, yeah, you could put Furiosa actually, and then the way it takes place, especially with that cameo we have,
exactly.
You could string this together and make a it's probably be like a 10-hour movie of Mad Max.
It would be like about 4.5. I did the math. It's about 4.5. Yeah, because Fury Road, let me check here. Because Fury Road is about, let me see how long that one is. Fury Road's an exact 120 minutes. So that's exactly 2 hours. And this one is about 2.5. So again, you cut those 2 movies together, and literally you could probably get about like 4.5 hours out of this, just about, you know? I mean, they want to bring back these, you know, they clearly want to go back to the 50s in the sense of just creating these massively long, very epic feeling, big budgeted films and release only about like a couple of them a year. So if that's what Hollywood wants to do, I'm like, shit, why don't we just, do our part with that and editing together these massively long cuts, rather than having to wait years on end for for these features. The only other person I wanted to talk about before we get out of here is Chris Hemsworth, obviously, who is the villain of this movie. Even though we get Immortan Joe and his kind of cohort back in this movie, the main villain of this movie is Chris Hemsworth and his character of Demetrius. And Chris Hemsworth, man, you want to talk about an actor who it feels like Hollywood is just not knowing what to do with, I mean, really, you could make that argument for a majority of the rest of the MCU actors, but I would say that that pretty much every other MCU actor has managed to kind of find their place within the Hollywood ecosystem. Olsen, Chadwick, unfortunately, before he passed, Cumberbatch, Tom Holland, Brie Larson, who already kind of had a little bit of a career going on, Mark Ruffalo, every other one of those, Paul Rudd, every other one of those actors has kind of been able to carve out their little niche within the Hollywood ecosystem, except for Hemsworth, because Hemsworth is the type of guy where, unlike the rest of those guys who are kind of still able to function in the world of, the Hollywood niches, the indies, the comedies, all that, Hemsworth is a dude where it's like, no, I want to be a star. And it really felt like, with the exception of one movie, when that being Rush, every movie that he's tried his hand at, outside of the greater MCU throughout the course of the 10 years since he really made his appearance into the MCU as Thor, obviously, you can make the argument, okay, he was in the first J.J. Abrams Star Trek, but that's for a 5-second cameo at the beginning as James Kirk's father. I mean, you look at the track record that he's had. It's like, you get, besides Rush, which is pretty great. Cabin in the Woods is solid, but that movie was filmed in like
2009.
Right.
Yeah,
So so the age difference there is pretty glaring, but you get, In the Heart of the Sea, Black Hat by Michael Mann, 2016's Ghostbusters.
You didn't like the classic, the 2012 Red Dawn reboot with Josh.
Red Dawn reboot. There you go, proving my point. And then probably my favorite failed instance of him attempting to be a movie star, that being 2022's Spiderhead, which came out this is a movie. Oh God, wait till I tell you about this movie. This is a movie that came out within a couple months of Top Gun Maverick. In fact, I'm pretty sure it was only released because of the success of Top Gun Maverick. From the same director, Joseph Kosinski, was released directly to Netflix and starred Chris Hemsworth and Miles Teller. Chris Hemsworth portrays this very strange head of this, off the beaten path island facility where they test like random drugs on people who've committed crimes in the past. It was an interesting concept, but ultimately kind of a failure at the end. And he gives such a bizarro performance. Hemsworth, in a weird way, is kind of like the modern day Brad Pitt in the sense of where he is this massive 6'4", strapped, muscular, gorgeous looking Australian man who desperately wants to play these random, goofy, wacky, funny parts. He wants to be a character actor, but he has the body of a leading man. Now, does he have the range that Brad Pitt does? I don't necessarily know. But the thing that I loved about his performance as Demetrius in this, as Dementus, I don't know why I said Demetrius there, as Dementus in this movie, is this is the first time it feels like, because this is the thing that he also talked about when he was making the Thor movies, is that the reason why he wanted Taika Waititi so badly is because after Age of Ultron, he desperately needed a course correction. He's like, the character of Thor, he's so stoic. I like it feels like I'm not really able to act as much as I want to. And now we know in hindsight, it's because he just wanted to have fun and be goofy. And we know that he can be goofy, but this is where he can really just play insane and have fun. And this is the first time where I feel like he's able to have fun and flex his acting chops for the first time, really, since any of the Thor movies, I would say, ultimately. And let me tell you something. If he continues to do parts like this, he'll have finally figured out and carved out his niche within Hollywood. I'm trying to think of what he has next. Obviously, he has another Thor movie that is coming out. This will possibly be his last between this and, if he ends up popping up in Secret Wars, whatnot.
I'm looking at his next couple things.
Right. And also, I forgot the Extraction movies as well.
He is going to cameo in Deadpool Wolverine. Yes. He's got a voice role in Transformers 1, which, and then it's a spy action movie directed by Matthew Vaughn, Project X, which is a with
Interesting.
him and Sam Rockwell. So that's what he has coming up pipeline. But
Well, I
yeah,
can't necessarily say that I'm excited for that one after, Matthew Vaughn's recent track record with the Kingsman and Argyle, but there was one, I just realized there was one other movie. There was one other movie that I forgot about from him that actually did kind of, like give him a little bit to work with and give him a little bit to like, flex around. I also forgot about those god-awful Snow White and the Huntsman movies that he was in as well.
it's okay.
And 12 Strong. And that's, again, it's a movie that was kind of so off the beaten path and forgotten about that you would be remiss to remember if he was in this movie. Did you watch Bad Times at the El Royale when that came out?
Yes, I did.
And he comes in the last minute as the Charles Manson stand-in, and oh my God, he is just having a friggin' blast.
It was a fun movie. Like, everyone had fun with it, and I think he is one of those actors, like, once you know how to use him, he is great. I just don't want him to go down the role of Liam, who's like a discount Henry Cavill in The Witcher now.
The fortunate thing there is that I don't think that he will ultimately. I think that, well, first off, Chris is, I think, so much bigger than Liam and so much more well-known. He spent a decade playing Thor. Everybody knows who Thor is, and the fact that he has been as good in those movies as he has been, Secondly, the fact that he has now shown with this movie that he actually has some chops and some range. I kind of always knew that he had them in there. He just kept getting material that just really did not benefit him, just really did not benefit him. They either just wanted him to be stoic or they tried casting him in like these goofy ass comedies and he does not work. Famously, we talked about this on the on your stream the other day, where again, I am not a fan of the Taika Waititi directed Thor movies, either of them. I think that the Thor movies consistently across the board have been the weakest elements of the MCU for me personally. And I just don't think that Taika Waititi really did the character or that level of story justice, because he just proved ultimately that he is not a fan of the Thor stories, So
it's the worst part too with the Thor movies, because there is a balance of like, you can have if you get someone who respects the lore and still wants to add a little bit, like not make it overly dramatic. Because like you think about it with the first two Thor movies, they were overly serious, but they had elements of comedy. It's like, okay, Chris Hemsworth has some chops and this could work. But then with the last two it was just like, we're going to lean more into the comedy. So it's like, there needs to be that balance. Because, Chris Hemsworth, he is kind of funny. Like, even say what you want about the 2016 Ghostbusters, but he does, like, he's like, even in Furiosa, some of his things made me laugh. Like, okay, you're kind of funny. And
he knows exactly what he's doing. And that's part of the reason, again, why he works so well in Furiosa, is because he's with the director. First off, he's with the director that actually understands him and understands his talent. Ultimately, I think the reason why the Taika Waititi Thor movies don't work is because he wants to make Thor so funny, like he's like a fish out of water sort of thing. And I'm like, Hemsworth is not a fish out of water. Like, the part that he's playing in those Thor movies is in such direct contrast to his physicality as an actor and what he's done previously in the MCU that it feels like you're getting shot in the head with something that completely comes out of nowhere, versus something in Furiosa, which is where he absolutely understands the source material. He absolutely understands what it is exactly. He understands the assignment. He is somebody who is equal parts deranged and insane. That's the difference. In Ragnarok and Ghostbusters, he's playing funny. In Furiosa, he's playing deranged. And that is the side of Hemsworth that we have not seen yet, is the deranged side. And that's the side that I think that he is more than capable of playing. And that's the side of him that I want to see going forward, because what is, if we're bringing it back to Thor as well, what's the one side of Thor that we really have not seen yet? We've seen classic Thor, we've seen, broken Thor, we've seen funny Thor, we've seen overpowered Thor, but what's the one Thor that we have not seen yet that everybody is begging for us to get in Thor 5? We have not seen Berserker Thor. And if he brings the level of derangement that he brings to this performance that he does to Thor 5, oh man, that might be the best Thor movie yet, personally, because you're right. He is equal parts funny, ridiculous, comical. He does have like this respect for his people, but he's just so insane and batshit nuts, that like in terms of like being able to survive in the Wasteland. And I just, oh my God. I mean, that ridiculous prosthetic nose that is so obviously a prosthetic that he's almost just showing it off and rubbing it in our faces. I just thought it was so perfect. It was so absolutely perfect, because I'm like, if that nose was on anybody else, it would have stuck out like a sore thumb. But Hemsworth, with his, again, massive 6'4" strapping figure, also the fact that Hemsworth is able to pull off getting his nipple rings pulled out and have it be like a moment of tension and not just passed off as a one-off like Marvel joke. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. He was phenomenal in this.
I think he needs to do more things like that. I don't know if his character can come back in maybe a future, because the question is, what do you do with Mad Max now? Like, do you continue doing the stories of the Outlands or anything like that, or do you try to be like, okay, we need to maybe pivot this? Because I remember you never played the 2015 video game, right?
Nope. As you know, I have not played. I am not a video game player.
So this movie actually has connections to it, especially with Gastown, because in the game, Gastown is the last location in the video game. And I read that George Miller said that game was bullshit because they didn't use a lot of his ideas. And the developers was like, no, you're bullshit because we used your ideas. It was the big. So it's like a he said, she said. And to be honest, you can use that video game as what Max was doing before Fury, because technically, they said it's a prequel to Fury Road 2, so you can place it in here. So the 2015 video game is what he was doing when Furiosa was doing Disney at the end of the movie.
Yes. So here's what I will say to that question before we wrap up and get out of here, which is that I had no expectations after Fury Road as far as where we were going to keep going with the Mad Max movies, and look at where we are now, And honestly, your idea as far as but I think that there's a world in which a combination of your idea and my idea where they would potentially do like a TV series showing showing actually the downfall of society and the beginning of the Wasteland, mixed with you're following an entirely new batch of characters that's not related to any of the characters that we've seen up to this point, with perhaps little inserts and Easter eggs. Where again, you get a 5-second insert of Max in this movie, and unless you're like really into the lore, you don't even realize it. And that's how freaking attuned to this lore, to the storytelling George Miller is. I think there's a universe where honestly you can literally kind of do whatever you want. Sky's the limit. Stories open to wherever. And what's it called? And either way, it'll work, because if this movie proved anything, it's that again, the Wasteland is purely limitless, mate. So, yeah.
He's a crazy slang who eats slanger.
He's a crazy slanger. And so with that being said, Mac, thank you once again for joining me. This has been an excellent discussion. Before we get out of here, your final thoughts and star rating for Furiosa, a Mad Max saga.
God, I'd say this is probably one of my favorite films of the year, because I'm trying to go back and see. I really don't have a definitive favorite film so far this year. I'm waiting more to get to the top 10 list, but this is definitely like at this moment top 5. Like, it is such a great film, and I'm going to give it like a minus. Yeah,
I agree. I would go again. This is my number 2 of the year right now after Dune 2. Fall Guys up there as well. Those are my top 3. It's been an interesting year, but again, the 2024 has definitely been the year of where the big budget spectacles have really, really been hitting so far. And I'm very, very excited to see kind of what we get next in terms of that, and especially given the summer, where we're going, so I'm very interested to see that. As far as Furiosa, this one gets props for being the first thing in a while that I didn't think we could possibly get from Hollywood anymore. It was a very welcome surprise. I was not expecting this movie to go in the direction that it did, and I am so beyond grateful for having done that. I give this movie 4.5 out of 5 stars. I absolutely freaking loved it. I had such a blast with it. I had so much fun. Man, you have all these movies that I just want to go and see again in theaters. I want to see Fall Guy again in theaters. I want to see, Furiosa again in theaters. All these movies, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. I want to see that movie again in theaters just to see if I missed anything. I'm very, very excited to see, kind of where the rest of the blockbusters go on. In a weird way, this is making me very confident for Twisters, honestly. Because if that, listen, I still don't think that's going to be good, but just given the caliber of where indie movies are now, I'm sorry, a lot of the indie movies, the fact that the best indie movie that I've seen probably so far this year is Monkey Man should tell you everything that you need to know. So with that being said, Mac, where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
Yeah, you can find me on TikTok or TalkTik. I'm on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. You can also catch me on Twitch. I'm going to start live streaming more. Besides doing tier lists, I might do a watch along. And our good friend Dom here will be on the show again.
Yes, sir. Yes, indeed, I will. And, of course, follow me with everything going on at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms. Follow the official Talkin' TV podcast across all platforms. Subscribe to us if you're watching us on YouTube. Follow us on Twitch. This episode will be available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts tomorrow. And, as always, people, 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next time.